Well, Dr. Veith, we've been talking about some of the flaws in the conventional wisdom about foods and healthy diets and eating regimes. It seems like there's a lot of scientific information that exists and is available to the public through your good efforts and others that is not being listened to by the general public. Why do you think that is?
Well, diets are entrenched in societies. Some of them are entrenched in cultures. Now, in my own country, South Africa, as I've always said, chicken is considered a vegetable. And it is such a meat-eating culture. It's like the New Zealanders. Mm. You just don't touch that part of the plate. It's holy ground. But then they suffer from the highest concentrations and the highest this and the highest that, colon cancer, breast cancer, all of those. I mean, they're going through the roof in that portion of the society that consumes these things. And it's interesting that the former rural societies have now switched to that diet, and they are 10 times worse off because they're not even attuned to it, so they succumb even faster to that sort of diet. So once something is entrenched, it's hard to remove it. But if a culture has a diet that is bad, then it's wise to change that part of the culture.
It's in the best interest of the individual to make better choices.
Absolutely.
So we seemed in our earlier discussion to have moved from a 5 food groups, healthy, balanced diet as we are taught to accept and believe is good for us, to a diet that eliminates animal products and concentrates on whole grains and fruits and vegetables. In essence, a vegan diet. That's the current common descriptor for that kind of a
well,
food
even
regime.
The World Health Organization made the comment that those that were more vegetarian had better health profiles than those that were vegetarian or omnivore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the vegan diet, the use of the term diet has, in the common vernacular, the sense of, as we discussed earlier, a bit of a fad. It comes and it goes. Is that the case with the vegan food regime?
Well, the vegan food regime is not a diet, as I said before. It's a lifestyle. Mm-hmm. But the variety of foods that's available is unending. It's unlimited. There is such a variety of food out there. And if you look at some of the cultures in the world, if you look at the Indian culture, the Mediterranean culture, some of the Eastern cultures, some of the South American cultures, even some of the African cultures, they were largely plant-based diets. And you have some, amazing types of foods, Malay foods, Indian foods, Mediterranean. Some of those recipes are absolutely tantalizing. Mm. And any Western regime can be modified by substituting that which is bad with that which is good. So I can use a normal recipe book and just substitute the bad for the good and come up with something that is lighter, maybe even better than that which was there originally.
Who first came up with the vegan eating regime?
God. We read it in Genesis chapter 1, the original diet. I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree with fruit on it. So vegetables weren't even included. But of course there must have been a vast variety, because if you look at the paleontology, the plants that we have in the paleontology are vast compared to what we have now. Mm. And when you come into the intricacies there, we live in such a fallen planet. If we take all the plants today that are vines, many of them, the great bulk of them, are only flowering plants. They don't actually have a fruit. Some of the vines, like the grape and the kiwi, etc., they bear fruits. Now, what if in the unfallen world, all of the vines bore fruit? Today, many of them have become parasitic. Well, if you look at parasites, parasites have very often free-living larval forms, where they have all the organs, like a mouth and eyes and swimming structures, and they're complete organisms. And then they go through a metamorphosis in the parasitic stage and end up being a collection of tubes and a reproductive organ. And everything else is gone. The genes are there, but they're deactivated. What if those gene capacities were all reactivated in a new world? I think we would have a variety that is unbelievable. I mean, some fascinating experiments have been done with using polarized light, for example, where you take a simple plant like a tomato plant, which is an annual at best, and turn it into a tree that bears on a regular basis. So these plants, many of the plants of the field, who knows what they were like before? I mean, even common wisdom, take apricots, that's a tree, or peach, that's a tree. And then you look at strawberry. That's just a little plant down there on the floor, right? But it's the same family. It's exactly the same family.
Really?
Yes. Now, in my own experience, I've had strawberry plants on my farm where I grow them. And if I give them the perfect environment, if I really make it classical for them, these things are huge. And their leaves are like this. You cannot believe that a strawberry can actually start to look like that. Now, if we can achieve that by improving the environmental conditions today, what must it have been like in the past? So I think we're in for a surprise in the earth renewed. And evolutionary speaking, I mean, if you take these plants and then you enhance the environment and you come up with this capacity that's built into that plant, it's just mind-boggling.
The genetic capacity.
Yes, or even just selecting in a plant, right? And you select and you can get these massive, fantastic fruits. So that capacity is actually in that genome. It's not human ingenuity that created the fruit. It's just human ingenuity that selected the gene pool variety of genotype to give that fruit. But we didn't create it in the first place. Now, if everything is so mediocre, but the capacity for this fantastic, massive fruit or variety is actually there, then it must be there by creation.
But if that's the ideal eating regime that God blessed us with in the Garden of Eden, there are some Christians that argue against that by saying, but hang on, God told Noah to take animals on the ark in sufficient numbers to feed the inhabitants of the ark. And that's meat. So doesn't that contradict the assertion that a vegan diet is the best and healthiest God-ordained diet?
Well, there is an ecological balance in the world which requires animals, because ecology is a turnover of cycles. And so you need animals on this planet. This planet was also created for animals. I gave a lecture the other evening where I mentioned the book Silent Spring.
Rachel Carson.
That's right. And what it would be like without animals, and I gave some of the details there. So yes, the animals were there, and the question is, were they there to be eaten? And why did he just take one pair of unclean and 7 pairs of clean? Now, if it just consumed one of those unclean ones, that animal would have disappeared, right? So unclean was never part of the human diet. just from that simple observation. Clean was permitted after the flood, but if you look at the typologies, whenever God took his people in a typological setting back to the Eden stage, taking them out of Egypt, taking them to Canaan, that typology. Daniel, type of the people of the end time message, the Elijah message. There was always the vegetarian component. And Jesus himself said, it was not so in the beginning, referring to other things. Then that must also apply to diet. What was it like in the beginning? The Bible is pretty clear. Vegetables were added after the fall. Obviously, because the earth was cursed and it was now bringing forth things that it didn't bring forth before. There must have been a climate change. That means the varieties were not there for the full season. To augment, God gave the vegetables.
Let's touch briefly on alcohol as a beverage, as part of a healthy regime. There are many that argue that consuming alcohol can be part and should be part of a healthy lifestyle and eating regime because, for goodness sakes, Jesus converted the water into wine at the wedding in Canaan. So it can't be all bad if Jesus produced wine.
Well, was that wine fermented wine or was it unfermented wine? You only have that one word in the Bible for wine. And we are pretty sure that he used unleavened bread, because that's mentioned. And the leaven was used as a symbol of sin. So logically then, he would have to use, in inverted commas, unleavened wine as well, unfermented wine, because if fermentation is a symbol of sin in the bread, then surely it must be a symbol of sin also in the wine. The other text that is used there is take a little wine for your stomach. Now we need to know the conventional wisdom of the time. What is the number one selling drug in the world today? It's the antacid.
Yeah.
Antacid. And today we use certain mineral components and we put them in tablet form or in effervescent form, and that's what we consume as an antacid. In the old days, in the time of the apostles, that was not the case. They used certain varieties of grape juice. Grape juice is the most alkaline drink that you can find. And certain varieties were prescribed medicinally for the stomach. So he would have referred to a non-fermented prescription. And a lot of the writings about Paul, his companion was Luke. And Luke was a medical doctor. He would have known what the medical prescription for a particular thing was at that particular time. Take a little wine for your stomach. Now you only have about a 1 in 96 chance that it would be fermented. And if it were fermented, then it would be the most pathetic advice that anybody has ever received. Because if you have a stomach ailment, the last thing you want to put in there is fermented wine.
So there's by what you say, it's clear that there's a biblical basis for not consuming alcohol. In part because it kills brain cells and interferes with your ability to commune and communicate with God. And he wouldn't want that, wouldn't advocate that.
Well, you have to look at the context of the text. Now, God would be inconsistent if he commends it on the one hand and condemns it in another text. So you always have to look at the context of the text to determine, is it fermented or is it unfermented wine that he's talking about?
Because there's one thing God isn't, and that is inconsistent.
No, he's not inconsistent.
Not inconsistent
he's
at
the
all.
same yesterday, today, and forever.
Tomorrow, yeah. So moving then to the science and the physiological basis, back to a healthy eating regime, is there a physiological basis that argues against alcohol consumption?
Absolutely. Fetal alcohol syndrome can be caused by as little as 1 glass of wine per day. So that's a serious thing. And wine drinking would therefore never be recommended for someone who is pregnant. But why should it then be recommended for someone who is not pregnant? The conventional wisdom is, well, wine contains so many positive chemicals as well, and secondary plant compounds, phytochemicals, antioxidants, all of these wonderful things. And if you have a little wine, particularly some red wine, it'll be good for the heart, etc. Eat the red grape.
So what's the problem in the wine? It's the alcohol.
It's the alcohol, yes. If you think that alcohol is a dehydratant, and if it is in your bloodstream, it affects, as you have mentioned, the cells of the brain, and it actually withdraws water from the cell. And then the cell, by osmosis, because of the increased alcohol content in the blood, as it flows through the brain, and then many of those cells don't recover and actually die. And you can determine this quite easily, because the thirst center in the hypothalamus, which is part of the brain, has cells which react to this loss of water or gain of water, and that determines whether you get the impulse that you're thirsty. And any drinker will tell you that if he's had a fair amount of alcohol, he will get this after-thirst when he's, compelled to drink huge quantities of water. That is the body giving the warning, my brain cells have been dehydrated and I need some form of replenishment.
Symptom of the problem.
Symptom of the problem. And besides all the other effects that it has, yes.
So, vegan diet, no meat, no alcohol. The Seventh-day Adventists have been advocating a vegan diet and no meat, no alcohol for well over a century now.
That's right.
Is there any science, apart from their faith in that diet, is there any science that supports the benefits to the individual of that kind of eating regime?
Yes, well, there was this massive symposium that the World Health Organization held a couple of years back, where they actually looked at the Seventh-day Adventists as a model and concluded that the longevity was greatly enhanced, but over and above that, the quality of life was greatly enhanced. And that's also where they compared all these various diets, including the vegan diet, and came to the conclusion that that was the best. If you look at societies that have this kind of diet, the Hunzas, some of the Indian tribes in the South Americas, these people also have great longevity, known for their great endurance and healthy lifestyles.
I think it was just over 10 years ago when I heard your first lecture on the health message. And as a new Christian and new Adventist, I decided at the time that, well, I'd better follow this advice, or at least some of it. So I decided to become a vegetarian, not a vegan. I couldn't quite contemplate eliminating to the extreme milk and eggs and cheese, but I eliminated all meat products. Because of my work requires a lot of travel, I found over the course of 4 or 5 months that I gained 15 to 20 pounds on this supposed healthier diet of vegetables and fruits. And concluded as a result that there was something wrong with my body or with that diet. Since I couldn't change my body, I decided to change my diet, and I went back to meat in smaller quantities, but still what I thought was a more balanced. And so I apologize now, but I ignored your teachings at the time because I couldn't contemplate gaining another 20 or 30 pounds.
But you say you were traveling a lot.
I was.
So you were probably imbibing in a lot of refined foods.
In fact, a lot of refined flour, bread products, a lot of pasta.
And a high fat diet probably as well, a lot of fatty foods? Did you have a lot of dairy products?
A lot of dairy, milks and cheeses.
Exactly. So that would not lead to slimming down. You have to eliminate the high fat. No,
Yeah.
it's the high fat component and the refined component.
Even though the meats were completely eliminated, you can still get that amount of fat intake that can cause the weight gain.
Absolutely. I mean, dairy is a very high fat food. And besides that, the cholesterol that you get in dairy is oxidized cholesterol because there are no antioxidants in milk. And once it is exposed to the atmosphere, the first thing that happens is it's oxidized, and that's the most dangerous form of cholesterol. So you weren't doing yourself a favor at all.
Nope. So vegan eating regime, the healthiest and the best for scientific, physiological, biblical, and actual testimony.
That's
all
right.
point to that conclusion.
Can I turn the table on you?
Sure.
You say you didn't, but now you are again. What caused that switch?
Well, that's a good question. I am a vegan, full vegan now, and have been for 3 months.
3 months. Wow.
I cold turkeyed and went straight to veganism because I was right out of the blue diagnosed with type 2 adult onset diabetes. Now, leading up to that diagnosis, I was in response to various stressors in my life, and all of my business travel was eating indiscriminately very rich foods, lots of restaurant foods, knowing that it wasn't necessarily healthy for me, but thinking as I get to the latter stages of my life, what the heck, I better have something in my life that I can enjoy. Well, the time to pay the piper, and I was diagnosed with the diabetes. The interesting aspect of that was that the doctor advised me that I needed to immediately get into significant injections of insulin, a regime of drugs to make the muscles more receptive to the insulin so they could process the glucose, and to completely eliminate carbohydrates and go on to a high animal protein diet.
Conventional wisdom.
The conventional wisdom. Now, I remembered enough from your earlier lectures 10 years ago, and to know that something about that didn't ring true. First of all, I wasn't interested in getting into heavy-duty drugs or insulin. But 4 o'clock the next morning, I woke up, turned on the TV channel, couldn't sleep, went to the Knowledge Network, and there was Dr. Neil Bernard giving a 1-hour lecture to, surprise, surprise, a group of diabetics.
Wow.
Now, this was divine intervention, I know for a fact. I mean, at that precise moment, I wake up from a deep sleep and turn that particular channel on at that particular time. And I sat for the entire hour enthralled by what he had to say. And the more I listened, the more I realized he's talking about the vegan diet that I've learned in the Adventist Church. But he also had his scientific experiments and the science to back it up. So I immediately the next day went to the bookstore, purchased his book, which I think is called Reversing Diabetes Without Drugs, with some nice recipes on the back. But because of my scientific training, it was very appealing because it was more than just a fad diet. It also had the science to support it, just as you have in your statements. I decided right then and there I would immediately become a vegan for health purposes, to see if I could reverse the diabetes. Now, my insulin levels and my glucose levels and my blood pressure and my cholesterol, I mean, everything was through the roof. The blood tests, he was stunned at how far it had gone. So I started to prepare these special menus, bought myself a mixer, got the Silver Hills cooking book as a gift, and started to practice this. First thing I observed was it wasn't very difficult at all, even for someone like me who travels so much. And
was it bland or was it
And it definitely was not bland because, as you alluded to earlier, the flavors of the foods, when they're prepared properly and with some seasoning, an incredible variety of flavors. Oatmeal every morning, lots of cinnamon, and growing the diet as well. 2.5 months into that process, I had my the next blood test, the first blood test after the diagnosis. Went to see the doctor. And he had the blood test results in front of him, and he looked at me with this puzzled look on his face. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, I don't understand it. I said, well, what is it that you don't understand? And he said, well, every single one of your blood chemistry parameters are within the normal range. 2.5 months as a vegan. Stunning. Incredible. He couldn't believe it. And he asked me, you know, how did it come about? Do you have any ideas? And I said, yeah, very simply. I went on a vegan diet. His reaction was, but where did you get the protein from? So we had a good discussion. I felt like I should charge him because I was giving him advice about plant protein and that kind of thing. But it's an amazing turnaround. And what I was stunned by was how easy it was. I mean, I was strongly motivated for health reasons. I mean, my father had diabetes when he was in his 70s and actually had both legs amputated as a result of that. Very extreme. I was fortunate enough, didn't have neuropathy or any retinopathy or any kidney or liver damage at all yet, so we caught it early enough before those serious symptoms set in. But it wasn't difficult. You commit. And one of the things I remember about Dr. Bernard's lecture in his book, he said, you know, your taste buds have a memory. And he said, if you commit 100% to a vegan diet and do it for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, if you can get to that point, your taste buds will forget what they thought they liked before, and the prospect of eating meat will be abhorrent to you. You won't like it. You'll be queasy, and it's absolutely true.
I remember when I switched from a meat diet to a vegan diet, I used to love meat and I used to love the smell of meat. And now it's totally the reverse.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, I was traveling in Chile 2 weeks ago, and my guests there, business associates, hosted us for a dinner, and we went to a Chilean open pit barbecue. And they had goats that were splayed on stakes, leaning over the coals, grilling slowly by the coals. And by this time they knew I was a vegan, and there's always good food you can get in any restaurant, even a carnivore restaurant. But I couldn't resist the temptation, so I got a knife and fork off the table and crawled underneath the barrier and put the knife and fork up to the goats. And they took a picture of me with this gleam in my eye, and I texted it to my children. And I said, the bad news here is Dad's tempted by this goat. The good news is I didn't have it. I had salad for supper. But the interesting thing, I watched my associates who were eating this barbecued goat, and my stomach roiled when I saw the greasy, cooling meat on the plate. And I was probably one of the most intense carnivores you could ever describe.
Well, I can say exactly the same. You know, diabetes is a very interesting disease. We're living in a society where diabetes is rampant, right? And it's increasing dramatically. And more children are getting diabetes. I mean, this was a sort of adult onset disease or late adulthood disease, but now more and more children are diabetic. And I'm not talking about type 1 diabetes, which is genetic, which is totally different, which, by the way, many scientific publications claim is also dairy-induced.
Really?
Yes, it's an autoimmune response to some of the amino acid sequences in casein, the dairy protein. But let's leave that aside. If you have modern society and you compare it with the old days, people worked. They worked on the farms, they did physical labor, they walked. They ate all these things which, you know, we might consider unhealthy today and got away with it because they were physically active. Today we sit in front of a computer, you do a lot of traveling, you sit in an aeroplane, you sit in a train, you sit in a bus, you sit in a car, and you're eating the same amount of food as those people ate, but you're not utilizing it. So you've got all this stuff floating around in your body. And then if you have a high-fat diet and you have a high-protein diet, these impact on your organs, and eventually your pancreas can experience deterioration, producing less insulin. But the problem is not only at the pancreas level, the problem is mainly at the cellular level. And this is where it gets interesting. You see, your cells are geared to taking up the energy and burning it. That's what you're supplying the energy for. So if you're supplying vast amounts of glucose energy to your muscular system, if you're sitting in an aeroplane, and you're sitting behind a computer, and you're not using any of those muscles, eventually, if you keep supplying these huge amounts, especially if you're spiking it, like with refined foods and high-fat regimes and all of these, the cell eventually masks the receptor for insulin. So you actually still have the insulin, but it's like, how do you put this? Make it like a doorbell. The receptor is like a doorbell, and there are gates in the cell, glucose gates, which open up and allow the glucose to go in. The cell says, I don't need this stuff anymore. I have an overload. So they mask it with proteins and close the doorbell.
So the insulin can't get in.
Can't get in. So the solution, the common wisdom is, let's increase the insulin level so that the connections are more frequent, and then you open the gates and allow
Like shock and awe treatment.
Shock treatment. But that's not the solution at all. The solution, quite simply, is starve the cell of glucose. And then the glucose level drops in the cell and make the cell burn its energy. So diabetes, exercise is absolutely essential. It's not just a question of eating. You have to exercise. You have to starve that cell of its glucose so that it will want the glucose. That's the first point. And then give it to it at the right rate. In other words, switch to a vegan, whole food diet. You have a nice constant rate of glucose. You don't have all the other parameters, the spikes and the spikes, of course. Immediately when you have a spike, the pancreas has to produce huge quantities of insulin to lower the spike. So you're depleting your pancreas. And it has to produce that again. And you're giving it the next spike and the next spike. And of course, you're going to have too low levels of insulin. You're going to have these high levels of glucose. The cell protects itself against that. You're cutting all that out with a vegan diet and creating this smooth situation. And then if you add exercise to that, very soon you are insulin free.
I've heard it described as well that the lock of the door is unlocked by the insulin that allows the glucose to get into the cell. And that if you have high animal fat intake, animal protein and animal fats, that the lipids actually gum up the lock. So that's another analogy to what you were describing, that just prevents the glucose from getting in because the insulin can't unlock it. So your insulin levels go up and your glucose levels stay up because it's not getting into the mitochondria in the cell. So eliminating the animal fats and the animal protein is a very significant way of reducing the lipids that are gumming up this lock that prevents the insulin from working and prevents the access of the glucose to the mitochondria in the cell that allows you to generate this energy.
Yes.
That's why I was just stunned. I eliminated all that fat, and within such a short time frame, the glucose levels were down, the fat levels were down, but the insulin levels were down. But what was even more amazing was, in the course of the first 6 weeks, I lost 9 kilograms. And yet I was eating like a horse. But it was whole grains and fruits and vegetables. Actually, not that many fruits because they have a high glycemic index, I understand. So, but more of the whole grains and the vegetables. And you get satiated quickly, and they're wholesome meals, and you're full. But you don't, at least I didn't have to count calories. And I'm still losing weight to this day.
You see, the conventional wisdom is the fruit has a high sugar content, but it also has a high soluble fiber content. If you've got your diabetes under control, eventually fruit is not a problem either anymore. So the idea of giving you a high protein diet, cutting out all the carbohydrates is actually self-defeating,
Yeah.
because your body will be forced to change that high protein into carbohydrate anyway, because you cannot store the protein. But the conventional wisdom says, well, at least you're not starting off with a carbohydrate, but the carbohydrate load remains exactly the same. You're just going to convert it. So that's not a solution at all.
The oatmeal, daily regime of oatmeal in the morning with lots of cinnamon.
Excellent, because of the high fiber content.
But there's a big liability with eating oatmeal if you travel. I had an experience in Turkey last month when I ordered my oatmeal, and they didn't understand what oatmeal porridge was. So I pointed out the oatmeal in the muesli and explained you had to boil this in water for a while. They said they would try it, but it was the first time I've ever had oatmeal porridge on a plate and had to eat it with a knife and fork. But it still had the beneficial effect. There was lots of fiber and lots of nutrition.
Yeah.
The second day they tried it with a little bit of instruction, some of the best porridge I've ever had.
Well, if you take vegan cooking, you can use oatmeal in virtually everything. Patties, use it as a binder. It's an excellent, excellent food.
Now, what about supplements? I was advised that I should take supplements, and I am still taking some supplements like chromium and coenzyme Q10 and alpha-lipoic acids, various supplements, because there's some research apparently that suggests it helps with managing glucose and making the cells receptive to insulin and other benefits. What's your opinion on supplements, particularly in a diabetic situation?
To me, supplements are something that are required under stress circumstances or under increased utilization because of some disease like diabetes. Then supplements have their place. But people like to supplement because it's in the vogue, isn't that right?
It's true.
My personal opinion is that the bulk of that supplementation ends up in expensive urine. The body has a very limited usage and very limited storage capacity. So if you're taking all of these high supplements, you're basically just secreting them or excreting.
Most of it's wasted anyway.
Most of it is gone, yes. If you have a balanced diet, now when we talk about a balanced diet, do we speak from the plate up or do we speak from the ground up? Because minerals and vitamins and the components in a plant must be very delicately balanced. Every single reaction in our body has a relationship with some other mineral and cross reactions with minerals and with vitamins. So all our enzymes function together with all of these micro elements that we need in the food. And conventional farming provides the soil with 5 or 6 minerals. And if they do poorly, perhaps a few of the trace minerals. Organic farming is totally different. In organic farming, you don't feed the plant, you feed the soil. And the soil becomes rich in organic matter. The plant doesn't take up that organic matter, but the bacteria and the microorganisms and the macroorganisms in the soil utilize that organic matter, and they produce acids when they digest it, and these acids leach the minerals out of the soil. So a healthy living soil has this tremendous bloom of bacteria and organisms in it that leach the minerals out of the soil and give it to the plant in a slow release, constant fashion. And that's why they grow so well and also have all the minerals that are available. So we need in excess of 80 minerals, 84 minerals. You will find those only in rocks formations. You will find them in rock salts, If you use normal table salts, then they've reduced the mineral content to 1, 2, or 3, 4 minerals. That won't supply it to you. And a plant that has an 84 mineral consistency is resilient. It doesn't get the plant diseases that other plants get. It's not so prone to insects because the phytochemicals repel them as they grow. And so good organically grown vegetables will supply you with the minerals you need, the vitamins that you need, the concentrations will be higher per unit mass. So it's important also that we look at how we grow things. And if you can't get them, then you must make sure that you get a variety. So don't only shop at one particular outlet that gets its produce from one particular place, because that one might have this shortage, the other one might have that shortage. Shop around. And don't always get the biggest and the largest, get the sort of mediums, and then you can be pretty sure that you will be getting a good variety of minerals and vitamins in your diet.
So if organically grown vegetables, fruits are not available, then shop around to get a variety to try to reduce that
That's
risk.
right.
But the preference would be organic.
That's right. And then also when it comes to the vitamins, it's also a question of multiplication. Because you are eating more than one meal per day, you are constantly augmenting. To take a supplement, often these supplements are not even in the right form necessarily for absorption. The best sort of supplement that you could get is when you reduce an orange down to a tablet, the whole orange. You get some companies actually work on that basis and then concentrate the vitamins that are available in the plant. That's the best sort of supplementation that you could get.
But you're missing the fiber, though, in that instance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of literature that some of them, of these excesses, are actually highly detrimental to you. And then also isolation doesn't necessarily work. I mean, the classic experiment was with beta-carotene, where we know that beta-carotene is anti-carcinogenic, and they started giving it to smokers to see whether they could reduce lung cancer. And they had comparative groups. The one would receive it, the other one would receive a placebo. And these experiments were supposed to run over a period of 10 years, but they stopped these experiments after 4 years because they realized that the group that was getting the beta-carotene actually had more cancer than those that didn't.
Really?
And the problem is not the beta-carotene. It's in its isolated form that it's a problem. Because within any living organism, there's this balance and this interaction between phytochemicals. So the beta-carotene needs the other phenolic substances and the other phytochemicals in the plant in order to be enhanced. And some of those interactions are so potent that even if you have very low levels of a particular amino acid or a particular, not amino acid, but of a vitamin, the potency can be enhanced 50 times, 100 times, even 1,000 times by
just from the synergy of the
from
two.
the synergy that you're getting, the synergistic effects that you're getting in the plant. So isolation is never a good idea.
So in that instance, it was too concentrated, too high a concentration, too intense a dose.
No, it was one chemical isolated from its
the others.
synergistic chemicals.
I see.
And then it had the opposite effect to which it has when it is in synergism.
I see. Yeah. But on that topic of the concentration and the amount, I mean, as with any substance, element, compound that our body needs, it needs it at certain concentrations. And if you have less than the minimum amount, it leads to deteriorating health. But if you have more than a certain amount, it can also contribute to deteriorating health. So there's a range of concentrations, putting aside isolationism for a minute, within which those various compounds and elements, chemicals, should fall.
More
that
is
not
not
true?
always better.
More is not always better. That's what
No.
I wanted to come to.
That's
and,
right.
And so bringing that truism back full circle to the discussion of vitamin and other supplements, the health fad industry of today promotes and sells, and in part through fear-mongering, gets people to spend billions of dollars a year on these supplements on the false premise that more is better.
That's right.
Yeah.
Especially also with calcium.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's being pushed as though it is the only mineral on the market that you require, isn't that so? I mean, calcium supplementation is the vogue. No, you need a balance of minerals. If you take the Hunzos, they have such a longevity. I mean, a person of 120 is a whippersnapper in that society. And these people run up those mountains there in the Himalayas, and they have all this energy. And one of the things they found is not only their healthy diet, which is not always 100% vegan, but largely vegan, is that they have this wonderful mineral mix because they drink glacial water. And it's sort of milky. It contains all the 84 minerals. You know, if you take the veterinary world and you take the medical world, the way animals are treated are sometimes totally different. Whereas certain diseases will be treated with mineral supplementation in the animal world, they'll be treated with antibiotics to treat the symptoms in the human society. And minerals, to me, are more important to receive in your diet than many of these, or supplements, than many of the other supplemental substances. Because minerals are foundational to enzyme activity in a cell. So if I would suggest something to people, I would say, if you're using a salt, use a rock salt, or at least a good sea salt.
Sea salt.
So that you have all the elements that you would require, all 84 of them. Now, what's fascinating, if you have hypertension, they'll tell you you're not supposed to use salt. And some people with hypertension and cardiovascular disease go to these spas where they have a salt cure. And they drink these high salt mineral waters that come straight out of the soil, and they're rejuvenated, and their hypertension disappears, and they go back into their normal society, and they're a different person, and 5 weeks later they're back where they were. And the wisdom is, don't take the salt, but when you go to the spa and the healthy thermal spring water, which is high in salt, you get the opposite result. It's got nothing to do with the salt. It has to do with the composition of the salt. You want an 84 mineral diet. You can get it from organic farming. You can get it from rock salt, sea salt. Here in your continent, you have the great salt plains. That salt is 84 mineral salt, so we really do not have an excuse. It's refined salt that's the problem.
There are lots of fads and eye-catching representations, if you will, that will lead to health. Things like ozonated water and a koji berry and all of these various things, and I don't know a fraction of them all.
Yes.
But it leads to the question, how can one be discerning enough to know the difference between a fad and fact, something that you should follow and should consider adding these things to your diet?
You know, when it comes to these new inventions, and you have to have this root, and you have to have that, and you have to import it from here and from there, personally, I think if you have a proper, balanced, variety-filled diet, then all of those things, as far as I'm concerned, fall away. I don't think that they are necessary. Do what is right, leave the consequences to God. And even in our society today, nothing is perfect. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect for me not to get a nervous breakdown. My philosophy is do what you can, do the best you can, and then ask God to bless your lifestyle, and then you have far less stress in your life. So I don't easily follow the direction of getting all of these strange things into my diet because it's healthy. I remember the story. I was lecturing once in Germany, and I was talking about all of the health components in food, and there was one young man in the audience, and he was heavily into it, and he was very excited. And he was saying, yes, but if you eat, oranges, then you need the peel, because the peel has these essential oils and this, and this. And if you eat the grapes, well, you need the pips, because the pips contain, the healthy oils and the antioxidants and this and that and the other. And I said to him, we would make perfect roommates. I'll eat the fruit, you eat the skins. I don't think you have to suffer in order to be healthy. But it's good not to ignore science. If you are sick, there are herbs out there that can help you. And the scientific world deals with disease in various ways. You have allopathy. That's conventional medical wisdom. Allopathy, the pathogen, the bad guy, you kill him. You have a bacterium that's bugging you, you wipe out the bacterium. You have a gangrene, you cut it off. You have cancer, you cut it out. That's allopathy. Then you have homeopathy. That's fighting fire with fire. So using whatever causes the ailment in a different concentration to fight the ailment. And then you have naturopathy, where you use the natural herbs and things in the environment to augment your body's immune system. Now, I come from the scientific world. I've trained medical doctors, and I've been exposed to all of these. Sometimes the homeopathic sphere goes into the esoteric sphere. So you have to distinguish then between homeopathy that's esoteric and homeopathy that's not esoteric. For example, personally, I find no scientific merit in increasing the potency of a medication by chanting over it. And this is some of the part of the conventional wisdom. But if you divorce that and you take homeopathy and allopathy, they have their prospective parts to play. Naturopathy, to me, is the most logical one. Naturopathy will add those components from medicinal plants that will assist your body. And there are many examples, where it's been proven, like echinacea has an immune boosting capacity, etc. That is, to me, the logical way to go, the best way to go. But if I have a virulent disease that's going to kill me before naturopathy cures me, my next choice would be allopathy. Yes. So I'm not going to say to a person, don't take an antibiotic. If the bacterium is going to kill you in 3 days, naturopathy is going to cure you in 2 weeks. Well, you're about a week and a half too late, right? But an antibiotic will sort the problem out in 2 days. Go for the antibiotic. But
it's just common sense.
Common sense. So if you use the conventional wisdoms of the world, and also the ancient wisdoms of the world, I mean, herbs, and there are many native nations that know more about herb cures than modern science has achieved in many cases. So there's something good in all of those, but my personal choice is naturopathy, followed by allopathy, and in some cases one can look at the good side of homeopathy.
If you think of the analogy then, if your health is dependent upon the ammunition you have to fight off disease, then the first line of defense to fight off disease is the naturopathic approach.
Yes.
But if disease has got a foothold...
No, the first line of defense is eat right.
Okay.
Do the best that you can and eat. You see, we have this tendency to say, well, this is healthy, that is healthy, or this horrible tasting herb is what you need because it contains this or that and the other. As far as I'm concerned, many of those things have their place, but under a disease circumstance. I don't have to treat myself as though I'm in a perpetual state of disease.
Mm-hmm.
I eat a healthy lifestyle, I enjoy my food, I can eat the foods that taste great and that make me feel good. I don't have to eat the bitter because it contains something healthy, which might help me in a disease situation. I can take that when I'm sick.
Mm-hmm. First line of defense then, eat right.
Eat right.
Vegan.
Yes.
Organically grown vegan, if it's possible.
If you can, that is the best.
Okay. But when, and it's inevitable, we are struck by disease, then we go to the use of naturopathy, allopathy if necessary in the extreme events.
And if you're going to travel or if you're in high stress situations, then yes, augment your supply and take some precautionary measures. That's wise. So take some supplements.
Yeah. So nothing wrong with, say, melatonin if you're going through time zone changes and you're suffering?
It helps you get your body back into a rhythm. A poor rhythm is number one cause for disease. I mean, I'm suffering with my throat right now because of a time change. Because just remember what happens to your body. Your body is used to shutting down at night, closing down shop, lowering your metabolism, and now you've turned your whole system around, and the time when you slow down, you're pumping the food into your stomach, you're telling it to get going, and it's saying, excuse me.
So Dr. Veith, you've been a vegan now for how many years?
About 24.
24 years.
Yes.
It's about 4 months for me, so I have a ways to go yet.
You have a way to go.
My concluding question on this topic is, any advice for the new vegan or those that are contemplating becoming vegans on how to get started and how to sustain that healthy eating lifestyle?
Well, number one, don't remove everything that's bad on the plate and be left with what you had that was vegan before. That is a pretty miserable experience. Do a little bit of research. How do I get the pizzazz back into the food? What am I taking out? What is it that I used to enjoy? Is it the creamy sauces, this? Well, you can have them all with nuts, making nut creams, nut sauces, cashew nut creams. I mean, it's fantastic.
And some great existing recipes. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
No, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You started off with a recipe book, right?
Yes, from the Silver Hills.
You got the Silver Hills recipe book. Well, what a great start. And there are many others as well on the market. Get some information. And then what is there to eat? You know, it's, if I take the meat off, then I'm stuck with the rice and the potatoes and perhaps, you know, some little vegetable here that might look green or yellow. Yeah. No, there's a plethora out there. Right. Find out what you can do with them. So get some input from the other cultures that use these types of foods. A
cornucopia of delight awaits the vegan.
Absolutely, and it's limitless once you start getting into it. And go into one of these mega stores that sell this type of stuff and just look around and say, well, what's that?
I think I'll give that a try.
Yeah, I'll give that a try and become adventurous in your lifestyle.
Well, Dr. Veith, again, thank you for sharing these words of wisdom and your knowledge and your personal experience. It uplifts me in my situation and my early start in veganism. But as you say, it's a choice. And it's a lifestyle choice. It's not just about diet. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.